And if you can't do that after a lifetime of hard work, then I don't know, then we're not in the right place. And so I'm glad we are. Could I have a round of applause for Randall Teig?
Do I take, have you got my evaluation form straightened out yet?
I send it to Brian.
Okay, all right, well.
I got your form.
All right, and I might as well proceed then. I'm gonna shamelessly boast about a lifetime of accomplishment. And my shameless boasting begins in 1977. That year, I decided to attend the World Peace Through Law Conference in Manila in the Philippines. There were a number of reasons for attending the conference. Number one, I got to kill off an entire year's worth of continuing legal education requirements by going there. Number two, I got to bring my wife back home to her native country for the first time in 7 years. And number three, since it was a continuing legal education project, I got to write off the whole thing as a business expense. So what I did not know is that because this conference was being held in Manila at the height of martial law, that the entire conference was a propaganda ploy for Ferdinand Marcos, then president of the Philippines. Upon arriving at the conference, everybody got a packet of conference material, which consisted of at least 2 books by Ferdinand Marcos. Every panel at the convention had at least 1 or 2 Ferdinand Marcos flunkies there to explain what a benevolent believer in democracy he was. And Marcos was so intent on impressing the world about what a wonderful leader he was that if you told anybody you were with the lawyers' convention, you got anything you wanted in the Philippines. If you wanted to skip being inspected at customs at the airport, tell them I'm with the lawyers' convention. You got walked right through without inspection. If there was a line at the restaurant to get in, tell the maitre d' I'm with the lawyers' convention. You went to the head of the line and you got the best seat in the house. Well, after the convention was over, my family decided to travel from Manila to Ilocos Norte. Ilocos Norte is on the very northern tip of the island of Luzon, and it is also the home province of both my wife and President Ferdinand Marcos. As such, a necessary stop along the way was Poway Lake, which you reach upon getting into the Ilocos Norte province. Poway Lake was special because Ferdinand Marcos was building a giant palace for Imelda on Poway Lake. Construction was supposed to be completed by Ferdinand's birthday, which was a couple of weeks away. And until construction was completed, there were armed guards all around the palace. You couldn't approach the palace without getting shot. But one of my in-laws managed to whisper into the ear of the head of the constabulary guarding the palace, pointed to me and says, he's with the lawyers' convention. And the guy says, lawyers' convention, why didn't you say so? And I was given freedom to go through Imelda's palace and look anywhere I wanted. Now, before I continue the story, I need to leave a little aside about life in the Philippines. The Philippines is a third world country. And one of the consequences of that is that apart from a half dozen major hotels in downtown Manila, there is not a clean public restroom anywhere in the country. And at no point is this more obvious than in the roughly 8-hour bus ride between Manila and Ilocos. So what happens is, as soon as nature calls and enough people yell about it to the bus driver pulls over to the side of the road. All of the riders of the bus get out of the bus, and everyone finds a rock, a bush, a wall, or some similar place on which to relieve himself or herself. In fact, anytime you see a bus stopped anywhere on the national highway, anywhere in the Philippines, it is certain as night follows day that you will also see an entire busload of people pissing on the side of the road. Now, obviously then, when I got free reign of Imelda Marcos's palace, the first thing I did was to find the most ornate bathroom I've ever seen in my life in which to relieve myself. We now fast forward 8.5 years. And after years of dictatorship and pressure from the American government, Ferdinand Marcos decides to hold a snap election. He holds the election just a few weeks after his announcement, the feeling being that nobody could possibly mount a nationwide campaign against him. He'd be overwhelmingly reelected, and he could claim to be a democratically elected president. What he did not count on was the appeal of Corazon Aquino. She was the widow of Benigno Aquino, Marcos's chief rival, who was murdered on the tarmac of the Manila airport upon returning to the Philippines from Washington, D.C., where he was in exile. Now, Corazon Aquino had amazing popular appeal. She registered tens of thousands of voters and drew rallies of tens of thousands of people for the entire length and breadth of all of the islands on the Philippines. And on election day, when it appeared all but certain that she was going to be overwhelmingly elected president, Ferdinand Marcos ordered the election counting stopped and declared himself president and conducted an inauguration ceremony. The public was outraged, stormed the streets, brought commerce all over the nation of the Philippines to a halt. Ferdinand Marcos decided he would put down the rebellion by force of arms, only to have his two leading generals refuse to obey his orders and take the side of the protester. Civil war in the Philippines was averted only by the American government flying a helicopter onto Malacanang Palace and whisking Ferdinand and Imelda off to exile in Hawaii. Later, it was determined, Ferdinand Marcos said to a press conference, that the only way the Americans got him onto that helicopter is they told him they were taking him to his palace on Poway Lake. Imelda Marcos's first decision as the newly installed president of the Philippines was when she told the American government, don't take him to Poway Lake, get him the hell out of the country. Well, that means that this palace on Poway Lake played an absolutely integral role in the fall of Marcos, the rise of Aquino, and the restoration of democracy to the Philippines. And I am unquestionably the first American ever to take a piss there. Fast forward 2.5 years, and I'm indicted by a federal grand jury as part of the Ferris Alexander RICO indictment. 19 months later, I'm found not guilty by a jury of my peers. And after I've been found not guilty, Mel Goldberg, a former professor of mine at the University of Minnesota Law School, then teaching at William Mitchell College of Law, which is the alma mater of Chief Justice Warren Burger, called me and asked me to speak to a 2-hour seminar on criminal law that he was teaching, all about my experience as a criminal defendant. I agreed to do it. And after my first hour of speaking, they took a 10 to 15 minute break. And I told him I needed a men's room. And he says, "You're not just going to the men's room." He takes me in the back of the classroom through some hallways and takes me to the personal private bathroom of the dean of the law school. And as I was relieving myself there, I thought, you know, I bet Warren Burger never got to piss here, but I did. I then told the professor that this was unquestionably the highest honor I received since I got to piss in Imelda Marcos's palace on Poway Lake. Well, a little later, I became active in the First Unitarian Society. And one of the groups at the First Unitarian Society in which I was active was a hiking and biking club. And we would regularly meet at a central location, take a hike or a bike ride on a pre-planned route and return to the point of origin. One of the places in which we met was the home of Gene Byrise. Gene Byrise purchased that home from George and Beverly Janos. Mr. Toastmaster, I bet you recognize those names, don't you? Well, George and Beverly Janos were the parents of James Janos, who became much better known when he went into professional wrestling and adopted the name Jesse the Body Ventura. And as I relieved myself before undertaking the ride, it dawned on me that I am pissing into the first toilet into which Jesse the Body Ventura ever pissed as a child. Well, my lifetime of accomplishment ends appropriately enough at the United States Supreme Court. Around the turn of the 21st century, the US Supreme Court had before it a case called City of Erie, Pennsylvania versus Paps AM. It was a challenge to the constitutionality of the City of Erie's ordinance on public nudity. I became the chief author of the Friend of the Court brief of the First Amendment Lawyers Association, challenging the constitutionality of that ordinance. All of us who participated in the brief decided we were going to attend the oral argument of the case before the US Supreme Court. But before we got there, I was contacted by C-SPAN because they wanted to have a program in the ordinance in which I, as the chief author of the First Amendment Lawyers Association, would debate the case against a religious nut for Americans Defending Freedom, which is probably the leading right-wing legal organization in the country. Now, our case was the second case to be argued before the US Supreme Court. And the plan was I would go down to the headquarters of C-SPAN and debate the religious nut on TV. They'd bring us back before the beginning of the argument on the second case. Well, we did that. They brought us back while the first case was still being argued. And the gallery was full, so we couldn't go into the gallery. So we were taken to the lawyer's lounge. That is a special lounge at the US Supreme Court to which the only people admitted are lawyers who are admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court. And there is a special bathroom attached to that lounge, and only lawyers admitted in the Supreme Court can use that bathroom. And as I was pissing there, I was humbled and awestruck by the thought of who must have pissed here before me. It was certainly possible that Daniel Webster pissed here. It is unquestionable that Thurgood Marshall pissed here. Indeed, Archibald Cox must have pissed here. Leon Jaworski must have pissed here. Kenneth Starr must have pissed here. It was humbling to think that the most famous people in the legal history of the United States of America have all pissed where I'm pissing now. And thus ends a history of accomplishment. And for any of you who might doubt the legitimacy of that accomplishment, ask yourself, where have you pissed that can hold a candle?
Sorry to interrupt.
Where I
Use a
pissed.
different word in terms of that, please.
I had to, while I was listening intently to this, I had to go back through my email to see if I had gotten the title correct that Randall had sent me, to make sure that he had not told me this was a lifetime of accomplishments. And no, he did not. That's my pun. That doesn't go on Randall, but I had to check just to see whether he had stooped that low. Thank you so much, Randall. That was as enlightening as anything I've ever